Hi there, I'm Stephen Lewis. Please like and follow at Stephen Lewis on the air, and thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to watch or listen to this. Hopefully you've seen it, because we're going to get spoilerific on The Batman. So if you haven't seen it yet, I'll warn you now, spoilers ahead. If you don't care about spoilers, watch away. If you do, come back another time. But definitely check it out so you can leave your own opinions and conclusions in the comments below. Batman, The Batman. Let's talk about how we got here. Of course, many different incarnations of the Dark Knight have been on the screen before, starting way back in the 40s with the 1940s serial. And I watched this, I think it was on Netflix for a time. I remember watching this a few years back just to check it out, because I'm a Batman guy. He's my dude, smartest guy in every room he walks into. And I dug the idea that they did a Batman. It just is very far removed from what we know as Batman. Now, at the time of the 40s, there wasn't a lot of history with the character, so give it a pass for that. It's certainly not a Batman you would probably want to watch all the time, but hey, it was an attempt for the 40s, and I guess kids in the 40s were probably like, oh cool, it's Batman, kind of like kids in the 60s were. I was not alive for the campiness of the Adam West version during that show's heyday, but it was something that when I would stay with my grandparents as a little kid, they would always find the various reruns on whatever network they were on, and I got a chance to watch it there. And as a little kid, it was a very cool Batman. I loved it, to the point where it prompted me to draw stick figures of Batman and Robin on pretty much everything. Growing up, now I look back at the campiness and go, I kind of prefer the darker version of Batman, which I was introduced to with the Burton version. Dark, cool car, black suit out of nowhere, just beat up criminals, had cool toys and everything. That was a really cool Batman for the time, which led right into the animated series, which is still one of my all-time favorite takes on the Batman character, the Batman the Animated Series from the 90s. If you haven't seen that, that's on HBO Max, I believe. Watch those episodes if you're a Batman fan. Definitely worth it. Of course, I could probably do without the Schumacher versions of the Batman. We took a bad turn there, so much in fact that it took it off the video canvas for a couple of years until the mid-2000s, when we see the Nolan trilogy reintroduce Batman in a very cool contemporary way with Christian Bale in the lead role, and a lot of that worked for me. Dark Knight will still rank as one of my all-time favorite comic book movies. Dark Knight Rises, ooh, you lost me a little bit on that one, but, you know, the body of work as a whole was still entertaining. And then we get to where we are now. Now, this started a few years back when it was supposed to be a written, directed, starring Ben Affleck vehicle, but after Batman vs. Superman and Justice League, Affleck soured on the Batman character a little bit because of a lot of the BS from Warner Brothers. Now, I liked Affleck's Batman. I think Affleck looked like the comic right off the page, but I understand why he walked away from this. So instead of it going to him just starring in it, it goes to Matt Reeves, who recast the character all together with Robert Pattinson, and here we are now with The Batman in theaters. So let's do this. Let's talk about what worked. Starting with the cast. It is cast extremely well from top to bottom. Colin Farrell steals the show as the Penguin. You will not recognize him, but he is a great take on the Penguin. Not as campy as Burgess Meredith, not as creepy as what we got from Danny DeVito in Batman Returns. A different version of the character that kind of fits in with what is in the comics. Now, I've always known the Penguin to be more of a gun runner, not a drug guy. We do get a little drug aspect in this one, but the character on a whole is fantastic. And the makeup two thumbs up on that one, because they give it this look. If you look at him right, it looks like he has the Penguin nose, even though he doesn't. It's just the scarring on his face and the way you look at it. And he's getting an HBO Max spin-off series to see where the character goes next, which I'm excited about. So Colin Farrell, not who I would have ever predicted to be the Penguin, but man, knocked this one out of the park. And so does Paul Dano as the Riddler. Now, this is a different take of the Riddler. Most people think of the Riddler in the Jim Carrey bodysuit or the 60s version. You don't get that. You get a Riddler who's more based off the Zodiac Killer, and he's kind of lethal in himself. He's a little bit insane with the mask and a little crazy without the mask. But a lot of what the Riddler does in this plays into the theory now that with social media and the ability to reach so many like-minded people, when you get someone who's crazy like the Riddler, he develops quite a bit of a following. You see it during the funeral scene where there are people with Riddler signs up because they appreciate what he's trying to do, which is expose corruption and take the city back for the people who are poor and truly live there. And Dano does a good job of this. He's the right amount of crazy, and he just looks the right amount of creepy when he doesn't have the mask on. Commissioner Gordon has always been a staple in the Batman universe, and we're used to seeing the Caucasian, grizzled, white-haired officer. This go-round, we get a grizzled African-American take on it, brought to us by Jeffrey Wright, who's been everything from James Bond to Westworld. And he's a good Commissioner Gordon. You still get the sense of him being the uncorruptible cop. He's got good chemistry with Batman. They are partners, true and true. And in fact, Gordon always been one of Batman's longest running partners. And they kind of both see things. Gordon lets him into what the police are doing because he has a level of trust there. And Jeffrey Wright plays a good Commissioner Gordon. I believe he is also going to be part of the HBO spin-off that is going to focus on the Gotham Police Department, which could be kind of cool. It might sound like Gotham being redone again, but it works very well with this entire movie, and so does the rest of the cast. John Turturro is Carmine Falcone. Now, they use him as Catwoman's daughter in this, and a lot of people go, what the hell are they doing? It's actually a comic book story. For the long time, Selina Kyle, the Catwoman, believed Carmine Falcone was, in fact, her father. She goes off to find out if that's true. Now, in this movie, she already knows it to be true, she being Zoe Kravitz, who might be my absolute favorite Catwoman yet. I know a lot of people will say Michelle Pfeiffer, Anne Hathaway. Nah. Zoe Kravitz looks like Selina Kyle right off the pages. The shots of her and Pattinson together, the silhouettes, look like it was just hand-drawn by Jim Lee or one of the other best comic book artists, and she works well. We don't know if she has any real powers. She does have the black cat suit, the cat burglary, the whip that she uses from time to time, the fondness for cats, and the dexterity. And it just fits in really well. Love to see her character again. I don't know about a solo Catwoman movie. We tried that once with Halle Berry, and it was a debacle. But if this version of Selina Kyle shows up, probably not going to be disappointed, which, you know, it is the movie about the Batman, so you got to get that casting right, and I think they did with Robert Pattinson. Now, for those people who think he is just Edward Cullen, he's come a long way from Twilight. Do your homework. The guy's a good actor. He's done some really good stuff over the years, and this go-round as Batman, he works. He's a lot better physical presence than I thought he was going to be. When he's in the suit, he's in the suit. You get a violent Batman who's trying to figure out what he wants to be and starting out being the symbol of vengeance, which he thinks is going to make a difference in his city. And he's a little unsure of himself. He's not, been Batman for that long. I'm happy they didn't retell the origin story. They give us to establish the fact he's been doing this for 2 years, and within that 2 years, he's been ground level, kind of hiding in shadows and pouncing on criminals and using fear and everything else that you would expect Batman to do. However, there is a part where he's running from the police and he's on a roof, and you can tell he's a little scared of heights when he uses the wingsuit thing. And it's cool visual on screen, but that landing probably would have done a little more damage than what we get there. And for the most part, Pattinson's a pretty good Batman. I've got some issues with him that we'll talk about later, but his Batman, it works in this. He's a detective, and that's always been Batman's thing, the world's greatest detective. We see a little bit of that with Bale in The Dark Knight, but this go-around, we see a lot of Batman being a detective. He takes his gear with him, he's got that CSI stuff happening, and it works extremely well. It's fun to watch, and it's good to see that version of Batman come to life, because it's one that we've never really seen before. It is a noir detective story, and it's a pretty good one for the most part. The other thing I liked about this is most of the Batman movies, Batman is kind of overshadowed by the villains. In the Joker, in both cases with Jack Nicholson and Heath Ledger, and even the other movies, it's always been about the villains, and Batman's kind of like the secondary character. This movie, there's a lot of Batman in it. He's got a lot of screen time. It's definitely his movie, and it works against the city. He's trying to figure out what he needs to be for his city. Gotham has always been essentially a character in the Batman lore. Now, I don't like that they went a little too New York with this version of Gotham. To me, Gotham has always been Chicago, whereas Metropolis has been New York, but that's neither here nor there. I just didn't like Gotham Square Garden and Gotham Central. It just, a little too New Yorkish for me. However, what Matt Reeves does with Gotham is extremely well at telling the tale of police corruption, political corruption, the rich having everything, the poor having nothing, and that tension that builds up within that city that leaves it depressed and crime-ridden and everything else. So a lot of what they did with Gotham worked extremely well. I'll forgive the New York-esque backdrop a little bit, and it also plays well against the score. And by score, I mean music. You've heard they bring a lot of the Nirvana Something in the Way back, and it's good to hear that record getting some love. But also, the score itself is pounding. It sounds like the Imperial March but it stops just short of becoming the Imperial March. It's pretty good. For me personally, though, I will forever love the Danny Elfman score. I kind of feel like that score says Batman, much in the same vein that Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all that music defines those franchises. Elfman will always define Batman for me, but this works nonetheless. So let's talk about what didn't work. For me, it was first the lack of Alfred. Andy Serkis looks like he could have been a pretty good Alfred, and, you know, Alfred always been the butler, so to speak, but the Alfred in his younger years was kind of a badass. He could take care of himself. He did some stuff, had a little Secret Service type background, and we do get to see him helping Bruce a little bit, solving some of the Riddler's puzzles and whatnot, but you just don't get enough Alfred for me in this. I would have liked to have seen more Andy Serkis. They get him injured and take him off the canvas pretty quickly, and I think that lack of Alfred kind of leads to a not the greatest Bruce Wayne. Robert Pattinson was a good Batman, just not the greatest Bruce Wayne in my opinion. He was a little emo, he was a little dark, and kind of unsure of what Bruce should be. I always felt like when Bruce came back, he knew that there had to be a clear definition between Batman and Bruce, and in this we don't get it. They're both dark, they're both brooding. Now, in real life, we all know Batman is the guy, Bruce is the real mask, but there wasn't enough separation for me, and I think maybe a little more time with Alfred would have fleshed that out a little bit, and we just didn't get that for the most part. The suit, we'll get to that in a minute, but the length of the movie was also a little too long for me. I'm a huge Batman guy, but I think the overall length of the movie, 3 hours, a bit much. There was some stuff that lingered that didn't need to. It drags a little bit here and there. You could have probably cut a couple of things that wasn't cool, that wasn't necessary. But overall, I just think it was a little bit too long. You could have shaved a half an hour out of it and still got what you wanted. The suit for me played a little better than I thought it was going to. I was hoping they would get away from the armor stuff that we've seen in every other movie. I do like the fact that they went to two-tone gray and established a different look. I wasn't crazy about the cowl, but overall, I think the suit worked for me. I like the Affleck suit. It just looked more comic book, and I'm more of a comic book guy. The other thing that didn't work for me, I'm sorry, I was not crazy about the Batmobile. To me, it was just a souped-up muscle car. Now, I know we're 2 years in, so I give it a pass, and he hasn't quite established it yet. But even as kind of unpractical as the Tumbler was in the Bale movies, it was a good job of showing him using Wayne tech to kind of establish his world and use that technology to be Batman with, much in the vein that Stark does with Iron Man. This time around, you know, I just didn't want my Batmobile to be a souped-up Hellcat. I kind of wanted a car that you've never seen before, something cool. And I didn't need to have, like, you know, monster-killing machine guns like Affleck's did, but it did need to have, like, something that when you see it, you go, what the hell is that? Like, much in the vein of the 89 version of the Batmobile. But needless to say, I'm nitpicking there. There were a lot of things that did work. The other thing that didn't work for me, no Wayne Manor. The Batcave and all of it is underneath the Wayne Tower in the center of Gotham. I wasn't really crazy about that. I kind of feel like Wayne Manor had always been part of the lore, and I didn't just, you know, the secondary penthouse has always been kind of like a secondary residence, but not the primary. Maybe that changes as we get into other movies, but I feel like they needed a Wayne Manor in this, in a different version of the Batcave. This one was very simple. It was more like a garage under the building, but I just feel like anybody could have found. Probably some security there that we didn't get to see, but anybody could have found it. There were some cool stuff. There was some cool Easter egg stuff in this, though. There's a scene at the beginning where Batman encounters a gang, and the kid that plays the gangster is actually the kid playing Tim Drake, Robin, on the Titans show. But he has half his face painted white because he's not completely initiated into the gang yet. But it's also kind of a quick throwback to Two-Face. You also, when they try to establish that Bruce Wayne's family where Thomas Wayne did some shady stuff back in his day. One of those is killing a reporter with the last name Elliot. He didn't kill him, but he had him killed. Elliot, who is also maybe related to Tommy Elliot, who becomes the villain Hush in the comics. There's some toss-ups there. When Catwoman leaves at the end, she says she's going to Bloodhaven, which is the city where the future Nightwing, Robin, when he leaves Batman, becomes Nightwing, and his base of operations becomes Bloodhaven, excuse me. And when you do see the Riddler go into Arkham Asylum, one of the inmates in there is clearly the Joker, played by Corrigan from the Eternals. And you don't full-on see his face, but you get a little glimpse of green hair and the scarred smile and whatnot. So maybe they go Joker next. You get the laugh and everything. It was just a cool little moment, all in all. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff with this movie I did like. I love the fact that they made him a detective. I love the technology. But I think that what the overall problem with this is, it's a standalone movie. So where does that fit? And what I mean by that is the comic book person like me will understand that there's 3 or 4 different Batman running around in the various Warner Brothers projects right now, and we can distinguish between those 3 or 4. The average moviegoer has a hard time with that. So you're going to try to figure out, now you've established a Wonder Woman, you've established an Aquaman, and they've interacted with Ben Affleck's Batman, but have nothing to do with this Batman. So that's a little weird. You've also got some of these other characters like coming out, like Black Adam with The Rock. Is he going to fit in this universe? Is Shazam fitting in this universe? They just never, Warner Brothers made a mistake from probably 10 years ago of not properly building out a world. And one thing you can say about Marvel, whether you like everything they do or not, is they have done a great job of building a world where all those characters are established within that world so they can interact with each other. Even the stuff that they're making now after Endgame goes back and ties in with the stuff that they made during and before Endgame. And they've created this giant superhero world. DC and Warner Brothers just has a lot of stuff flowing around out there that doesn't really fit with anything else. There was a lot of rumors now that the Joaquin Phoenix version of the Joker was going to cross over with this version of Batman, and it didn't make sense. This was originally supposed to be set in the 90s, whereas Joaquin Phoenix's Joker was in the 70s. So if you have those two crossover now, it's Batman knocking off a 70-year-old Joker for, I don't know, robbing bingo halls because the guy's too old to do anything. So you've already separated that Joker with this Joker, which presents the need to establish another Joker. And this movie definitely set in modern times. The technology being used here is cool, but definitely modern. Like in this point, like he can't remember what he does at night, so he wears contact lenses that record everything and he can play it back, which was a cool trick. But it just certainly, that's a little bit too advanced for 90s technology for sure. And it's just, I'd like to see where they go with this. It's a good standalone, but at some point in time, you need to establish, if you're going to establish a superhero world that makes a lot of money, like billions and billions of dollars, like what Marvel has done, you got to get your big 3 right, that being Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And this is a different take on Batman. I hope they change the suit a little bit. I like a lot of what they have going on here. And as a standalone Batman story, it works really well. But the other thing that kind of, Batman has a history that I would love to see adapted on the big screen that they just don't do. Everybody kind of takes from that history. Like this takes a lot from The Long Halloween. Just Snyder with Batman Superman took a lot from The Dark Knight Returns. You know, there's just all these stories they take from, but they don't adapt. And I'd like to see one of those stories adapted because I think the story itself is rich in history and can do its own thing. And again, I didn't hate this version of Batman. It's a little too long. I definitely liked Pattinson as Batman. I'm curious to see where they take the character next, where he's even a little bit more established. It's casted well. It's scored well. There's a lot to love about it if you can get past the length. And I do think you should see it in XD or IMAX or something along those lines to see it in all of its mastery. It probably sounds like I'm dogging on this movie. I'm not. I'm a Batman guy. I like this version of Batman. I just wish it fit into a bigger world so I could see this character interact with some of my other favorite characters that I loved growing up. Needless to say, that is The Batman, spoilerific as it may be. If you see it or if you have seen it, love to know what your thoughts are. Drop a comment or follow me at Stephen Lewis on the Air on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Check it out for yourself. Draw your own conclusions, and when you do, down in front.